Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. Now, today we are finally going to be talking some proper NBL 25. Now, we're going to be working through all 10 teams and touching on what they've done in the off-season and looking forward to NBL 25. Now, as always, I'm joined by the fellas, Ryan and Jeremy. How you guys going, fellas, and what you been up to?
Josh, mate, great to be back and finally looking to NBL25, the team previews. It's really exciting that we're edging closer and closer to the season. We've spent our weekend in London, live streaming some Australian football in London. It's been a fantastic weekend. It was hot and sweaty, but it was great fun.
Yeah, we certainly did some Ks in London, but definitely looking forward to finally knuckling down into this NBL 25 season. We've been talking about doing it for so long, it feels like, and now we're actually finally here, and the countdown is on officially with the Basketball Fix.
Definitely, the countdown is well and truly on, and yeah, we've been sort of pushing this back a little bit as well, obviously to stay relevant with the times. But it's gotten to a point now where we've pretty much pushed it as far as we can, and it's definitely time to nail in. And I know we're super excited to touch on, like I mentioned last episode, talking about the NBL improvements. This is what our bread and butter is at the Basketball Fix. So we're super excited. Now we're going to be touching on and starting with 10th place. Now with these, we're going to be starting on 10th and working our way all the way up until the top of the ladder, which will be the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, because they were the eventual champions in NBL 24.
Yes, they were,
now,
baby.
Quick little recap on South East Melbourne. Now, last season, I think it was very disappointing for them. They had a lot of, star players and really good role players as well in their team, but for whatever reason, they couldn't find a way to have them all on the court at once. Guys like Mitch Creek, obviously a guy who was hurt throughout the season. Alan Williams just really couldn't get his body right. Obviously, from the start of the season, I think he missed the first between 5 and 10 games. And when he was on the court, was obviously an MVP caliber player. And obviously Gary Brown as well was another one. But it was just a really injury-riddled season from start to finish, which resulted in them finish with a 10-16 record and finishing on bottom of the NBL ladder. Now, Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on this. Now, who was some of the players that they've lost from last season? Because obviously what we're going to be going through who they've lost and also who have they gained. So what are some of the players they've lost, Ryan?
Well, mate, I think one of the biggest one, Alan Williams, they decided, or according to all the media reports, a mutual parting of ways for the big man and South East Melbourne, which I think puts them at a bit of a disadvantage. They only now have one kind of recognised centre in Jordan Hunter. And Alan Williams is one of their top scorers last year and top producers in only the 15 games he played. So he's going to be a massive out for this team, and it's still really under a cloud of uncertainty how they're going to replace him in the lineup, and not only his size but his productivity on the court. Obviously injury riddled last season, as you touched on, but an MVP caliber style of player. Showed a lot of promise, and yeah, I guess the rebuild or the clean out of South East Melbourne just facilitating his movement out. But a massive loss in my opinion. Jazz, what did you see out of these guys coming into this season?
Yeah, I think the key phrase right there, Ryan, is an absolute clean out. You've got the other biggest signing that disappeared, obviously, is the well-documented Mitch Creek getting his chance in Asia, but haven't really heard anything of where he's signed or not yet. But, he was their first ever signing. He's played there for 5 years. Does sort of feel like now, I guess, that whole, initial entry into the league is now gone. Mitch Creek's gone. It's huge. And the interesting thing will be, there's obviously a lot of talk, and it's very sad. He's been one of these originals of South East Melbourne. But I don't know. My question leading into NBL 25 is it a good move or a bad move? And I'm sort of feeling, honestly, that it could be a very, very positive thing for South East Melbourne. It mightn't happen now, but I think what they're doing overall with sort of losing Gary Brown, Gak, Nadar, I think this big clean out could very, very, very be a positive thing. Maybe not in NBL 25, but maybe 26 or 27. And the departure of Mitch Creek can be a positive in the end. So but it is a big loss. Obviously, you've got to cover his stats somewhere. You've got to cover his work when he's on the court. He's averaged 20 plus points in 4 or 5 seasons there. He's averaged 30 plus minutes in every season that he's been there. Yeah, he's had some injuries, which obviously they need to find someone that's gonna cover all these minutes and cover these stats if you go into that Moneyball side of things. So huge loss for them, but it could be a positive in the end. Josh, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I do completely understand where you're coming from as well. And I think obviously one thing that has been mentioned and talked about with Mitch Creek, and obviously I don't know Mitch personally, and you can only really talk about what you see on the media and obviously the court as well. But I just think in a way, he was obviously the team captain and the marquee signing and one of the first major signings for South East Melbourne Phoenix. But I just want to question his leadership. I think in a certain way, I just don't know if he's the strongest leader for this team going forward. And I'm on the belief of Jeremy that it probably is a really good thing going long term as well. So it's going to be very interesting because when you put all of that aside, he is still probably one of the top Australian basketball players currently or just recently in the NBL. So you're touching on there 20 points per game in multiple seasons for South East Melbourne Phoenix. You can't really, I guess, replace that because it wouldn't just be 20 points a game. It'd be 7 or 8 rebounds and a couple of steals and a couple of blocks here and there as well. So he is one of the premier players in the NBL, and it is sad to obviously see him go. But realistically, it's a purely, I would say, money decision. Realistically, you're not walking away from a marquee roster or a marquee spot to obviously not play in the NBL again. It's obviously purely based around money. So it's a sad time for South East Melbourne. But again, though, it's I guess bringing on some fresh faces, voices, leadership, all that sort of stuff as well, which is super important going forward for a team who still hasn't made the NBL playoffs yet, and I believe their 4th or 5th season that they've been in the NBL. But I want to touch on a couple of other guys who you just mentioned there, Jeremy. Now, obviously, Gary Brown and Abdul Nader. Now, Gary Brown was one who I think showed a lot of promise in NBL23 and was obviously re-signed back to South East Melbourne. I think he started 24 in all right fashion. I think he had a bit more, I guess, pressure on him with obviously a couple of injuries to Mitch Creek and Alan Williams to start the season. But he's a guy who I think is a really good playmaker, but I think he lacks a little bit of confidence in his shot. Now, he's obviously a very good driver of the basketball, I think, personally, and a very good mid-range shooter. But I think he does lack a little bit of confidence, obviously, to, I guess, knock down the three-point shot. But it's going to be very exciting, I guess, to see how they replace him in NBL25. Now, Gary Brown, have you got a couple of thoughts on him, Jez?
Yeah, I think you're on the money there. It seemed like his highs were really, really high. He had some really huge games, double-doubles. He certainly showed his class. But I think the lows were too low because you go from a game where he's hitting a double-double and getting 15 and 10 or 11, and then all of a sudden he's scoring 3 points the game after playing the same amount of minutes. So I think, like you said, it's the inconsistency in his shot and his ability to play every game and play that role, especially with the injuries, of course, that South East Melbourne had. It's hard to find your role, I guess, because there's so much movement going on all the time. But but I think it's just you can't have that in a player. Like if you're looking for a high caliber import player, you really, really want to have consistency during every game, but they just didn't get that there.
No, definitely. And another player as well, when we speak of injury-riddled, Abdul Nader. Now, it was a very weird signing, I thought, personally. We know the caliber player that he is, an NBA sort of talented, good enough player over there, and a guy who obviously did very well, I think, in the minutes that he did get for South East Melbourne. But he come over not playing a game in 2 years due to some knee injuries and some other injuries as well that he had sustained over in the NBL. He has, like I mentioned, hasn't played basketball for 2 years at a professional level. That is just weird signing to me, to be honest with you, from the start. I just think that really sums up, obviously, what South East Melbourne were building and obviously what they were thinking last season, because I don't really understand going and getting, yes, a talented guy, but a very injury-prone person to obviously jump into your roster. But, I want to get your thoughts on one other guy, Jez. Now, this guy, I'm really excited to see what he can do in NBL 25, and I've seen him, in person in Perth for the Rockingham Flames. Gorjok Gak, mate. What are some of your thoughts on him?
Yeah, probably one of the most underrated players you could almost say in the league. Like he was playing just 15 minutes there, which is quite surprising considering the injury trouble that they did have. But putting up some pretty decent numbers, like only say 5.4 points per game, but he was also averaging 4.9 rebounds a game with just those short minutes, and also shooting at like 50%, 67% from three. Obviously, 3 points, not taking a lot of 3 points, but when getting the space and the opportunity, most likely being open because nobody's looking out for him to hit three. He's hitting, 2 from 3. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting, going forward, how the Jack Jumpers do use him over there, because I think he's very, very underrated and a massive signing for them, because they obviously need to fill some holes at the moment, losing Lee and McVeigh, and can probably use someone that can definitely get under the rim and get some rebounds. And so, I think it is a big signing and a big loss for them. And it'd be interesting to see how he goes if he can get some more minutes over there in Tassie.
Yeah, definitely. And he's another one that I want to mention. Obviously, with the NBL Supercoach, he was another guy towards the back end of the season who really, really catapulted my season as a whole. And he was really, really impressive. I think he's going to be a guy going forward who I personally think he's not the one that you want to lose. He would be the absolute perfect backup for a guy like Jordan Hunter, who obviously has signed with the South East Melbourne Phoenix. Now, touching on players who have signed, I want to start with you now, Jeremy, and then obviously go into Ryan as well. Who are some of the players that have signed for South East Melbourne Phoenix, and what are your thoughts, and what are you looking forward to seeing from them?
Yeah, I think they've made some really, really big signings. Like we said, they're on a bit of a clean out, so they've definitely worked hard in the off season. And the biggest challenge for them is I don't know what's the word, continuity, where obviously how everything's going to go. Continuity, thanks, mate. How everything's going to go and how they're all going to gel and how the chemistry is going to be between everybody. But I think, they've done some smart signings. If we just rattle off some people that were in that championship winning team with Sydney in 2022-23, getting back Derek Walton Jr., played in Sydney, Jordan Hunter played in Sydney, and also Angus Glover played in Sydney in that team. So they've gone a long way to obviously find some chemistry through their signings with players that actually maybe know each other, have played a little bit before, have already a connection, which is extremely smart. It's a very, very intelligent way to do it when you're doing a clean out. And I think you see a lot of, different clubs in other sports do a very, very similar thing where they're poaching players from similar teams that have played in the same team. So I think it is a very, very smart thing to do, and just obviously how it works in the long run. But I think the biggest one is, the NBL Grand Final MVP, Derek Walter Jr. Getting him is a massive signing, and replacing him as, I don't know, potentially a replacement for Mitch Creek or Alan Williams in their scoring side of things. He spent some time playing in China, I believe, and wasn't really getting the minutes, strangely enough, over there. So, but still putting up pretty decent numbers. He was playing only like 20 minutes a game in China and averaging 12.3 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, which are almost just a little bit less than what he was posting in the NBL when he played for Sydney. So, but playing 10 minutes less. So he's definitely got the class, and can be a really, really key signing for them. But Ryan, another big signing obviously was Nathan Sobey. What do you have to say about that, and how's he going to come into this team with some of these Sydney players, I guess, and now he's got to find his place as a key scorer as well, possibly.
Long question.
For Sobes, it's typical Jez throwing me 14 questions. No, but I think for Sobes, like coming back home to Melbourne, essentially, he's said in the media that he coming back to his home city and finding that kind of home life, looking forward to it. And I think he's going to settle in a little bit more now. He's 5 years in Brisbane, was a superstar player there, massive amount of minutes, massive amount of points, and coming to now the rebuilding South East Melbourne, I guess you'd almost say edging towards the twilight of his career. I think they're going to need to turn to him as a majority scorer. And I think compared to his time at Brisbane and coming back here now and going to be a leader in this team, I think he's going to probably mature in this role. It might not happen straight away, but I think it will happen over the time that he's here. And together with Derek Walton Jr., maybe find out, okay, this is how we play together, and this is the scoring and the ball usage that we'll have together. And I think he's going to have to be a very prominent player in this team straight up and in the next couple of years if they're going to be successful. But they've brought in quite a lot of new talent, and I'm pretty interested, Josh, with your knowledge of the players here, who you think is going to come into this team and be important for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I just want to touch on Nathan Sobey, mate. Obviously, I think the thing with Sobey is you don't know what you're going to get out of him. I remember back to his first sort of couple of years in Brisbane, it was really hard to try and figure out, was his role, the player with the ball in his hand and being the playmaker as well as a scorer, or was his best role and best sort of, I guess, position a pure shooting guard where you just sort of kicked it to him isolation, or kick it to him in the corner, or kick it to him on the top of the elbow. It was really hard to find that mix that was that worked well for him. And I think personally, the best role for Sobey was him having the ball in his hands majority of the time and being able to create, obviously, like with playmaking, and then obviously with scoring as well. And I just don't know personally if he's going to be able to do the same with this particular team. Obviously, Derek Walton Jr. is going to have a very high usage throughout the whole NBL season. We saw that in his time at Sydney as well. And he's a guy who I think really likes shooters and obviously good, solid inside bigs around him. And he's a very, very crafty, I guess, playmaker. So it is going to be very interesting to see how they use both of them in the same starting lineup, because we all know if Sobey is happy to go and play that, I guess, second fiddle to Derek Walton Jr., this matchup and this sort of duo here is going to work out very well. But I just have questions sometimes about Nathan Sobey's ego, and I think his personality as well. I think he loves being the number one guy. We know what he's like. He's a bit of a show bloater. He's a bit of a guy who loves it all and all the attention being on him. So I've just got a few questions. I just don't know if it's the sort of the right signing. But yeah, Ryan, you've got a couple more thoughts on that?
Well, I'm just wondering, like, in your opinion, if they get through, the first 5 games and it's terrible, what do? What are their options?
It's definitely one of those things to touch on. Maybe they bring a Sobey off the bench, for example, and he runs that point. We obviously, runs that 1 or even that 2 on off the bench. We see it all the time in the NBL. You look back to even last season for the New Zealand Breakers. Obviously, a little bit injury-riddled was Willie McDowell-White, but I think what really worked was, they really had, I guess, 2 good, solid point guards who could both score, and one would start and the other would come off the bench. So, it's going to be interesting because I think that's the best way of doing it. I think, personally, you start and you run with Derek Walton Jr. and you make him the face of it because he's been there and done that at the biggest stages in the NBL. And I think Sobey can come on as a punch off the bench. I think, realistically, he'll stay on and they'll just try and persist with it the whole time. But, Jez, what are some of your thoughts on that topic, mate? Because it's definitely an interesting question.
Yeah, it is a great question, Ryan. And it is going to be, it's going to be a question of their personalities and obviously how they play together. And I don't know, I can't see Nathan Sobey being too happy coming off the bench, to be honest. If it all goes downhill, I think they have to persist with what their plan is at the start. I don't think moving Sobey to the bench is going to make the situation any better, and it's definitely not going to make it better if Derek Walton Jr. goes to the bench either. I think you're going to have to persist with them and find the right combination of, all right, who's leading this team, who's the key point guard, who's the deliverer, and who's going to be taking most of the shots, and who are we trying to get into the right areas to take those shots. And yeah, that's the whole thing with a new team with all these sort of new faces is, how are those combinations going to work? But I think the craziest thing that they can do is not stick with their original plan. Obviously you have to make changes at some stage, but doing it too early could be extremely dangerous. I think you need to just sort of make some small adjustments with, obviously who's feeding the ball, who's shooting, and maybe it's a night to night thing. Who's hot, who's not. You can sort of see with the Boomers at the moment, which we need to give a shout out to for beating Spain recently and going so well in the Olympics already at the moment. But they're doing a very, very similar thing with Giddy and Mills, and whoever's hitting is getting the looks and they're feeding that. So maybe that's something that they can do. But yeah, time will tell, definitely. So, but yeah, there's a couple of more signings, Josh. Do you want to rattle off some of those and give us your opinion and what you think?
Yeah, definitely. And one little thing, obviously, just to wrap up Nathan Sobey is Mike Kelly, who is the coach, obviously, of South East Melbourne, has dealt with Sobey for a number of years with the Australian Boomers program and a lot of other programs like that. So I think he's the best person, obviously, to have Nathan Sobey. And it was a very big reason as to why Sobey did sign with South East Melbourne. Now, I know I'm going to mess up this name. Now, new import to South East Melbourne, Joe Wee Scump, I think it is. Now, he's a former...
We're so good at
NBA
these
draft
names.
back in
I love it.
2000.
I love it.
I normally nail these ones, but normally they've been in the league.
It was
for a year
rubbish,
or
Josh.
so,
It was
but
rubbish.
It was a former pick 41 in the 2021 NBA draft, most recently playing for Boston Celtics G League team, the Maine Celtics, putting up averages of 11.5 points per game and 5.2 rebounds per game in 28 minutes of play. Now, always the question does come, how do these players adjust to the NBL system coming from the G League? Now, we've seen it with some players absolutely excel, and some players have a really hard time adjusting because it is a very different, I guess, sort of game style and the way that the game's played over here. It is a defensive first system, I think, personally, and then it's obviously there's some nights where offense does just obliterate. It's going to be interesting because I look at a guy like Derek Walton Jr., Nathan Sobey, and now Joe. We're just going to call him Joe. I think they're all similar players in a way. They're all score-first players. I'm not really sure if they're all great movers of the basketball. I think Derek Walton's obviously the best one, obviously, with his most recent season in the NBL with 6.3 assists, but there's just lots of questions for me. I just don't know if it's going to work, if it's all going to fit. There's going to be a lot of shots, a lot of opportunities for probably only one or two of these guys, and it's just going to be interesting to see who plays third fiddle for them. Now, you mentioned them as well earlier. I just want to touch on these two guys quickly before I throw back to you, Jez, with one of the next stars. But Jordan Hunter and Angus Glover. Now, I'm really excited for Hunter myself. I think he's a guy who's been demanding the most of and the majority of the minutes at the center position last year. I thought was his chance. They brought in Jonah Bolden, who was obviously an outstanding player, but I just really think that they underutilized Jordan Hunter, though, for a lot of the season last season. He's a guy who can score inside and out. He's a very, very good defender, a very good rebounder. I think he's well and truly ready to be the number one guy at the center position for any team in the NBL. I'm super excited to see him in South East Melbourne. And Angus Glover as well, like we mentioned, a former NBL champion for the Sydney Kings. Fell out of the rotation last year. I just think it's going to be interesting to see what he does in NBL25 for South East Melbourne Phoenix, because like we've been saying, they're in a bit of a rebuilding, retooling sort of era that they're currently going through, and I think Mike Kelly's got his fingerprints all over this roster, and he'll get it going as well. But let's touch on the NBL next star, Jez, in Malik Lewis, mate, because he looks exciting.
Yeah, definitely an exciting player. Has had a pretty illustrious career so far through college and playing in the USA 2 League for Mexico City Capitans, if that's also right. But yeah, like he's a player that's really sort of improved, it seems, as he gets older. He's been developing. I'm pretty sure he's 20 years old, possibly
19.
22, somewhere there. Oh yeah, there you go. So like I think you've seen sort of when you look at his statistically, obviously, he's improved a lot. His last 3 games of the season, he had like 11 rebounds, 13 rebounds, 11 rebounds. Even though he's quite a small guy, he's like small forward, you say, at 6'8", but he seems to be able to get under the rim and be very good defensively. And exactly sort of what you were saying is, where's the defense going to come from? And you're going to be obviously looking to Jordan Hunter to get those rebounds and get some of those blocks and get in the face of opponents' big men. And, you know, maybe it might come from Malik, depending on how many minutes he plays. But I think he definitely has the caliber, and he's shown that even at a young age that he can be a strong defensive player. And yeah, he can also score. He 8.5 points per game he was averaging over there, and also 1.3 assists per game, a block per game. So I think I read something. He's got a massive reach as well for a little guy. So I think he is a really, really interesting player. Another great next star signing for the NBL, and can be a real big signing for South East Melbourne, and fill some of these voids that we certainly have questions about. So yeah, very, very interesting and a really, really good signing for them.
Yeah, 7'1" wingspan there, Jez, for Malik, and he's a kid, but he's got a grown man's body as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do in NBL25 because hopefully we add him into the list of NBL next stars drafted in the lottery, or hopefully the first round as well. Now, I want to touch on a few of the South East Melbourne's needs to wrap up this episode, and then we'll touch on and see if they were successful in our opinions. Now, I think some of the needs were injury-free players, which is obviously a big one from last season. They needed shooters and all-around scorers, solid defenders, a good backup of local talent, and obviously some really strong local players. And I think the biggest thing as well they've really got to go for with obviously this changing of the guard with Mitch Creek leaving is a strong leader and really building towards a healthy culture. Now, I'm going to start with you, Ryan. Do you think that they have been successful in some of these categories, or do you think that they've sort of failed? What are some of your opinions on how that they've done on the off-season of NBL 25?
Well, I think you really need to separate the actions they've taken, because they're not all consistent with each other. But if you think about, they weren't successful, they had a lot of trouble, and then they've started to address those problems. And so they've gotten rid of the injury-prone players. They've brought in a new crop of talent to try a different way. And I think that is a positive in itself, and it'll be interesting to see, whether it works out, but they've at least done something to try. Then whether or not they've been able to achieve the kind of peak of what they were trying to achieve in this off-season, recruiting the best players in the right positions for their game plan, that could probably be questioned a little bit, and they still haven't maybe filled out their roster entirely, but you only have the pool of players you have. So I think they've done all right, and it'll be interesting to see how it all glues together. They've at least made some changes to try and lift themselves off the bottom of the ladder, and it'll just be interesting to see how it all ends up.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on there. I think it's they've done all right, and they've done it right on an individual basis, and time will tell if they've done the right thing as a group. Definitely, like we said, if we go to those points, Josh, and you're looking for shooters and all-round scorers, they've got some shooters and some all-round scorers. Injury-free players, I think they've brought in, some pretty good young talent. So you hope that they obviously stay injury-free. Got some, obviously you lose Creek, but you've almost done a replacement with a veteran in Sobey. So, and obviously coming back to Melbourne. So they are ticking the boxes, but how it'll go is a complete another story when you do a full clean out like this. And like we said, it could be more of a long-term thing that they're after, and that's probably a smart thing to do. So we probably don't have to be so critical if it goes to shit early and they're not as strong as some of the other teams, because they might have a long-term plan here, and it'll be really interesting. But I think on a individual basis, I think they've certainly made some really, really good changes, and we'll just see how it goes in NBL 25 and maybe NBL 26 and maybe NBL 27. Who knows?
Yeah, I think their saving grace going forward is I don't think there's going to be too much pressure on them, obviously, making the playoffs this season or even next season either. So that's going to be their biggest saving grace. I think if they finish on the bottom ladder again, there won't be as much, I think, kickback than obviously what there was last season with this team from top to bottom being quite strong. And obviously with two guys who on their given might could, give a double-double with 20 points and 12 to 13 rebounds in Creek and Williams, who also were, all NBL first teamers and even MVP caliber players. So, I think they've done relatively well, obviously. And I think they're sort of, I guess they're, needs coming in were realistically bringing good people, young talent, as well as some old mentors and leadership players, and I think that's worked very well for them. So it's going to be very interesting. Now, guys, to wrap up the episode, I want to get your overall off-season grades. Now, I want to start with you, Jez. What grade have you given South East Melbourne's off-season for NBL 25?
I'm going to give them a straight-out B+. I think they did what they needed to do, got rid of some old dogs, some injured dogs, which can be very, very beneficial for the future, and then brought in some young talent, some players that they can certainly build around over the next few years, especially, probably the best signing there, Jordan Hunter, that they can really build their team around, and then just finding some stability with their guards and their shooters and playmakers, which is going to be really, really important for them. So B+, 100%.
Ryan, yourself, mate?
Yeah, I'm around the same, to be honest. I think there's if they could bring in another recognised centre before, that could possibly lift them even to an A minus. I think you need to look at the long term perspective, not only just what these player movements and the off season has done for this coming NBL campaign, but what it could do, as we've spoken about on this episode, what it can do for the next and the next and the next. And I think that feels like that they're maybe planning a lot more to the future than what they have done in the last couple of years. So around that B plus, and if they can make another couple of additions, then they could even go up to an A minus for me.
Definitely, and I'm on the similar bandwagon as the guys. I'm going to give them a B for this off season so far. I think, like we've all mentioned, it's been a pretty successful campaign, but I think those grades will go up or down depending on obviously how Sobey, Walton, and Old Man Joe do mesh together, and obviously do create something hopefully in this NBL25 season. But that will wrap up today's episode and South East Melbourne's season preview for the NBL25 season. I'm looking forward to seeing what this team can achieve. It's going to be young. It's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a lot of pressure, I think, on some of these players to perform at the top level. But at the same time, though, the expectations are somewhat low as well. So that'll wrap up today's episode. If you want to follow and listen to more, make sure you check out our YouTube channel, our website, and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. Whenever you are listening, make sure you follow, rate, and review the podcast. And until next time, that was your Basketball Fix.